All right. So we have our stage. And we have some holes. Your holes might not be set up like mine, but it doesn't really matter. Just that they're on the stage. And so if we're going to make this mole appear where these holes are, what are some things we need to know about the hole? Yeah, we need to know their x and y coordinates. So some things that we need to remember about the hole is we need to remember where his x is and where his y value is on the screen. And then you might not think of this right away, but there's something else we need to know about the hole. If there's a mole already coming out of our hole, okay, so he's popping out of the hole. Do we want another mole to appear out of the same hole? No, right? So if this hole is being occupied, now we're going to take some time for making our mole come out. His head's going to come out, and then he's going to come up, and that gives the user a chance to like hit the mole, right? So we want, this mole to last on the screen for maybe like a half a second, right? We want him to pop up and then go away. Okay? So this hole is going to be occupied by this mole, and we don't want another mole to start to appear here while the first mole's there. Okay? When the first mole is popping out of the hole, we don't want the second or the third or the fourth mole to come up out of the same hole. Okay, so when he's being used, when that hole is being used, we need to remember that he's being used and not make another mole appear there. Okay? So something that we need to remember about our holes is if he's being used or not. So if he's being used, we don't want to make another mole appear out of it. Okay? So we need to remember these things about our hole. And there's different ways that you could program this. But one way that you could program it is to encapsulate these three things into a hole-type object. Kind of like how we did with our enemy objects. Remember our enemy objects? We remembered their x value, their y value. And we also remembered if that enemy object was invisible or not invisible. You remember that? We made that Boolean state variable for our enemy objects. So we're going to do the same thing with the hole. Well, remember its x value, its y value, and then we'll give it this Boolean kind of state value. It's called like a state value to tell us if he's being used or not being used. And my iPad is recording the wall. It's the only problem with this thing. If it doesn't turn with you, it records over there. All right. So we're going to make a class type for our hole. We're going to have his x value, his y value, and if he's being used or not. Okay? And then we also need to make our moles. So some of you might have already created your mole. Did you create your mole character? Okay, you might have created your mole character. If you haven't, we'll just use a rectangle today until you create your mole character. Now your mole character is going to have to know some things about himself too. Okay. Now your mole character, you're going to have it last on the screen for a little bit. So we're going to have to animate him so that, he starts out small and then he gets bigger. Okay, so he looks like he's coming out of the hole. Okay. And some things that we'll need to know about our mole is his x and y value. We need to line it up with the hole. And then we need to know if he's appearing on the screen or not appearing on the screen. Okay, so that we don't, so if he's in his state that he's already appearing on the screen, we don't make him appear over here and jump over here. Okay, so we also need to know if he's invisible or not invisible or being used. Okay, so we could use the same kind of invisibility or not invisible, or we can just call him being used. And if he's being used, we don't want to make him reappear too. So we're going to kind of follow this methodology. Okay? All right. So what should we make? Should we make our moles first and then our holes? All right. So let's make a mole character. You guys will be able to change this mole character later, or if you have your mole character, we can use your guys' mole character. But I thought we could program this part a little bit together. All right, the moles and the holes. And then you guys could get your whacking devices working. All right. So I went and got an image online. Now you could go and get an image online, or you can just use a rectangle to make your mole. You guys want to use this image? Or do you guys want to make your own image? It took me like 2 seconds to make this image. I just stole him from offline. Here, I'll upload him to Blackboard really quick. So you guys can use him if you want. Now remember to put all of your assets, like all of your images and all of the things that you use, into one folder. Okay? So it's good to put everything that you're using into a single folder. Come here. I hate it when it records the wall. It always wants to record the wall. Let's see here. AS files, whack-a-mole. Here's my mole.png file. All right. So if you guys wanted to use that mole.png file that I'm using today, I uploaded it for you. Now, if you have your own, drawing of a mole, you can use your own drawing of a mole. Now, here's how I thought how to animate this guy. And we're going to animate him a little bit different than what we've animated before. Now, we could animate him with a motion tween if we wanted to, but I was thinking about how this whacking device is going to hit this character, right? So let's think about it. So the way that Flash Professional works and a lot of programs work is it sees its hit area, right? So remember that your hit area of a movie clip object is that blue box that's around that mole. Okay? So if your mole is this big, his hit area is going to be around him, right? Okay? And if we animate him and make him a movie clip object, and he starts out down here, and then he gets bigger, and then he gets bigger, his hit area is still going to be this large. Okay? And so when your mole's head is only this big out of the hole, and his hit area is up here, it's going to be kind of silly if we hit up here, right? Okay? And maybe you guys could think of a different way, but I thought this way to kind of animate our mole is that we're going to animate him a little bit different without a motion tween, without an internal movie clip. We'll just use the timeline, and we'll just take parts of our mole and put them on each frame. So the first frame will have the head of our mole, and we'll just have, a picture that looks like this. We'll cut out part of his head and put him on the first frame. And that way his hit area will stay small. And then on the second frame, we'll make his head a little bit bigger coming out of the hole, and then his hit area stays around his head. Do you see this, how it's working? And then on the third frame, it's kind of like old-fashioned animation. When we do it frame-by-frame animation, his head will be a little bit bigger, but in that way, we're keeping that hit area just surrounding our mole. Okay, and if you want to program it different, go for it, but this is, how I thought how to program this thing. And it's just so that his hit area stays with him. And this is a good way to learn how to animate anyway. It's a different way to animate things. It's called frame-by-frame animation. Okay, it's kind of the old school way of animating without motion tweens. Okay, I thought if we animated our mole this way, we'll still get the animation of him coming out of the hole, but then his hit area will stay on top of him. Okay, and I'll show you how to do that. We're just going to take pieces of him and then put him on each frame. It's actually pretty easy. We do still want him on his internal timeline. We don't want to put this on the outer timeline, of course. Okay? And he's still going to be a movie clip. All right, so I'm assuming most people either have an image, or you can just use an oval today, or you can use my mole.ping, okay, that I just uploaded to Blackboard. So make sure that you have mole.ping in your library, or you can just make an oval and then replace it later. Okay, or use your own mole that you have. That would be perfect, actually, if you used your own. All right. So I'm going to drag my mole out here. I'm going to F8 him and make him a movie clip object. Of course, name it with a capital letter and then export for ActionScript. As we always do to make him a movie clip. And we'll press OK. And then I'm going to double click him so I can animate him on his own timeline. Okay. I'm actually going to make my mole a little bit smaller. That looks good. Now I need to think about how long I want my animation to last. If I'm working at 24 frames per second, how long do you think our mole should last? In those games, how long did they last on the screen? So we have to think that he's going to come up, and then he's supposed to go back down. So we have to animate him to come up and then come down, right? So how long do you think he should last on the screen? How long should he come up and how long I don't really care. What do you guys think? A second? Yeah, we'll make him last a second. So he'll come up for half a second, and then he'll go down for half a second. Okay? That sounds good. All right, so I know that I want to stay within this 24 frame mark. Okay? And I know about the middle frame, about frame 12 or 13, I'm going to have his full body sticking out of the hole. So I want this image to be sticking out of the hole. Okay? And one thing first, too, I just noticed that his hit area right now, do you see his well, not his hit area, his XY hashtag right there is up there. See his XY plus sign? I actually want my mole, I want his bottom part to be on the XY part, so that way he'll appear where the hole is. So I'm going to change that first. So remember that you can use your free transform tool to do this. And you just move your mole so that his bottom of him is on that XY coordinate right there. All right, that's cool. All right. So we're going to do frame by frame animation. Okay. So when you want something to happen on the timeline, it needs to be a keyframe. So I'm just going to put a lot of keyframes on this timeline. Okay, to do this part. Okay. So I'm going to come down here to my timeline, and I'm just going to hit F6 down here. And I'm just making some frames, and I'm going to animate, well, I'm going to put different images on these frames. So I'm just going into my timeline, I'm clicking on those frames, and I'm just pushing F6. Now a couple of these I could combine. Maybe I should combine some of these. That's a lot of frames. But whatever. If you wanted to combine some of them, what you do is like every 2 frames maybe you want it to be animated. Then you would just push every other frame and push F6. That's a lot of animation right there. Now the more keyframes you have, the smoother the animation will look, of course. But you could do every 2 keyframes too. Or every 2 frames make a keyframe. And I'm going to go to about 24 seconds. All right. Actually, we might have to edit him a little bit. All right, so about frame 12 is where I want him popping out of the hole. All right. All right. Actually, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to have different images. So here I just want his head. Here I want a little bit more of his head. Here I want up to like maybe his eyes, and then up to his nose, and then up to his hands to be on this keyframe, and then his whole body here, and then the opposite on the way back, you know, until he looks like he's going down. All right, and I think the easiest way to do this would be to edit him inside of a Photoshop tool. Okay, so we're going to edit him inside of Fireworks, actually. Okay, I'm going to cut out pieces of him. All right. So let's see, I'll have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So I need to make 6 different parts of him so that when he comes up, he'll be his full self after 6 steps. All right. So I'm going to open up Fireworks here. And I'll give you guys a couple of seconds to open up Fireworks. You guys could do this in Photoshop too if you'd rather do it in Photoshop. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to crop and just have one picture be his head. And then crop, and then one picture. So I'm going to have 6 pieces of him. I'm going to split him up into 6 stages. And remember, if you wanted smoother animation, you could split them up into more pieces and have more keyframes. Okay. But I'm going to go like this. I'm going to use my crop tool. Maybe this isn't the... Okay, I'm going to use my crop tool. I'm going to take part of his head. So if you guys have your own mole, you can do this to your own mole. And I'm just kind of thinking, okay, this is going to be piece 1, piece 2, piece 3, piece 4, piece 5, piece 6. Piece 6 will be all of him. Okay? You guys could probably do it a little bit more exact than me. I use Fireworks, yeah. Just to use something that can take out pieces of him. Now, we could have done this in Flash maybe, but the only thing that they really have in Flash is this lasso tool. They don't really have a crop tool in here. So I'm going to double click after I crop him. Control C, I'm going to copy that. Control N, I'm going to make a new image. Control V, I'm going to paste it. Now it pasted it with a white background. So if I click anywhere off of him, I can go down to my properties panel and choose my canvas and tell it no color in the background. And then I'm going to save it. Save it in the same folder where you're saving everything. And I can call this like mole 1. That's going to be my first image. And I come back to my mole. Control Z undo. And now I'm going to crop and I'm going to make mole 2. Okay, remember to get like the top part here all the time. So make sure that, you know, you're getting the top part of your mole. Rexy, stop it. Okay. Then you do the same thing. You double click, Control C, Control N, enter, Control V. Make your canvas transparent. Control S and call it mole 2. So it's going to go from here to here. Go back to your mole, Control Z, Control Z. Just undo him again. See how we're just taking pieces of him? And we can use our crop tool again. This will be mole 3. Maybe up to his nose. Double click. Control C, Control N, enter, Control V. Make our canvas transparent. Control S for save. Mole 3. So it's going to go boom, boom, boom. And now Control Z and Control Z. And this is, how you cut up a picture for a frame-by-frame animation. Okay, so this will be mole 4. So same thing again, I crop him, double click, Control C for copy, Control N for new file, Control V for paste, make that transparent, and then Control S for save. And remember that you could do more than, 7 different pieces if you want to. So Control Z, Control Z. See them up to 5. And then 6. So I'll double click. Control C, Control N, enter, Control V. Get rid of that background, Control S for save, and call him mole 5. This isn't going to be the prettiest animation, but it'll be okay. And then Control Z. And I think that's probably enough for me. I'm just going to do 6. So it'll be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then I'm just going to have 6. You see how when we play this really fast together, it'll look like he's coming up? Rexy, stop that. I'll wait a couple seconds, but once you get those created, so let me just move on and then I'll come around and help too and make sure everybody's kind of got it on track. Once you get those created, you'll import those images into your library. And then what you'll do is on your frame-by-frame animation for the first keyframe, I'm going to delete that image and I'm going to have mole 1. And actually he is big and I should have made him smaller to begin with, but that's okay, whatever. I'm going to set his height and width over here, so then it'll be the same each time. Hopefully this will work. We probably should have set his height and width to begin with, but maybe I'll just make him big. He'll just get to be big. Okay, so that'll be mole 1. And then you go to the second frame. You'll delete that mole off the sage. And put mole 2. Notice that I'm lining up his bottom part here. I'm lining it up to that X and Y, crosshair right there. So it's going to go mole 1, mole 2. And then on the third one here, so on the third keyframe, the third set of keyframe right there, I'll put mole 3. So he's going to go 1, 2, 3. And then I'll put mole 4. And on the next keyframe, I'll put mole 5. Now the next keyframe, my mole 6 is just mole. So he's going to go, see how he's growing? Okay. Now I need him to go back down. So on the next keyframe, I'm going to go back down, so I'm going to put mole 5. You see how we're going to make him go back down? On the next keyframe, then I'll put mole 4. And the reason that we're doing this, you know why the reason that we're doing this is so that his hit area will stay on him. And plus it's good to know how to do frame by frame animation. And here we'll put mole 3, he's going back down. And then mole 2. And then my mole 1. And the last keyframe, we don't have to have anything. So you can either get rid of those keyframes or keep them. So then run your playhead and see how he comes up. Then he's popping up. You can hit play. And then we have a little frame by frame animation going on there. And that way his hit area will stay where he's located on the stage. Plus it's kind of easy to animate him that way so he looks like he's popping up like that. Now you can make it a little bit better animation by adding, you could add part of the hole on here or do what you want to do down at the bottom. I'll let you guys get creative with that, but that's how you get him to come up. Okay, cool. We'll wait a couple seconds for people kind of to finish that. I'll come around and make sure everything's going well. Recording again. Okay, so we're going to make our vector a whole bunch of instances of our mole. I'm going to copy and paste this code, and you guys can too if you want, from our old game. Now, I don't have anything inside of my class, but you guys should have your start button and stuff working. Okay. So I'm going to make this vector. I'm going to call it my moles. And it's going to be a vector of type mole. Remember that this is our type. That's the type of object the vector can hold. And then this is the name of my variable, and you can name your variable anything you want. A lot of books will say that you should use a singular noun, but I don't know. It kind of makes sense to make a plural noun here. Okay, so we declare, remember that you declare your instance variables at the top, and then you instantiate them in your constructor. Okay, so we declared him. Now I'm going to copy that instantiation code from my old class. So this is my avoider game. I'm just going to copy and paste this code and then modify it. Okay, this is where we are instantiating all those bullet objects, remember, in our avoider game. So I'm going to instantiate my mole vector here. So I'm going to do the same kind of thing. First I have to make the new vector, and I can double click Control C, double click Control V. That instantiates my new vector, so he's not a null pointer, he's a new vector. That means he sets aside some RAM to store my moles objects. And in the first part of my for loop, I can leave the same. This is going to create 10 moles because it's going to go from 0 to less than 10, so it's going to count to 10 for me. That's what that for loop does, it just counts to 10. Loops me around 10 times. And then I just need to change some of the names here. Remember, mole with a lowercase m is different than mole with an uppercase m, because the mole with an uppercase m is my object type. So I'm going to make a new mole object. And then I'm going to push that new mole object into my vector. Remember that the S's makes, this is my mole's vector. This is my mole object, one object. And then I'm going to comment out this disappear function for a second. Actually, we need to write that. In fact, just to see some code, actually let's comment out that add child too. So this will instantiate some mole objects and put them into my vector. All right. So just to test that our mole object can appear on the screen, let's just try it out. And my code complete is not completing for me, so I'm just going to look up online my vector API here. And need to get one object out of my vector. We don't want to remove him. Sorry. All right, maybe we'll just make him. And just to test him out, let's just make a new mole. We'll call him test mole, and we'll comment out this code after. I just want to make sure that he'll appear on the screen, which is good programming practice, right? Just remember how to make a new mole. We'll say, okay, test mole. Your x value equals something, and your y value equals something. And then we'll just add you to the screen just to see if you add to the screen. And note that he keeps on playing because I didn't tell him to stop and I didn't tell him to go away. And so he just keeps playing. All right. After you see that it works, you can actually comment out that code. So that was just our test code to make sure the mole appeared. Now, if he didn't appear, let me know. But he should appear and then go up and down like that. All right, which is good to see that he can appear. All right, now we're going to edit our mole objects class. And the reason that we want to edit our moles objects class is a couple of reasons. Remember that we don't want him to reappear if he's already appeared. We need to keep track of who's on the screen and who's not on the screen. Just like our bullets. Remember when our bullets hit the avoider or hit the enemy craft, we wanted them to disappear and not, and we wanted the enemy craft to disappear. Same thing. So our mole, we're going to give it this property if he's being used or not, if he's on the screen already. So we need to put that property into the mole class. And it's going to be encapsulated inside of every mole. He's going to know, every mole is going to know about itself whether he's being used or not. We need to encapsulate that and put that with the mole objects. Okay? It makes sense. That way, we can keep track of things. They can keep track of themselves. All right? All right. So we're going to go over to our flaw file so we can get that class. We'll go to our mole object. We'll right-click and go to his properties. And then hit that little pencil icon next to our class. And remember, that'll let us edit the class file for our mole objects. Okay, this is kind of the easiest way to do this, I think. And that way you know that you got the right class file. You know it's going to connect right. So you hit the little pencil icon. It says, yes, do you want me to open in Flash Professional? And we say yes. And remember that this is the class for our mole objects. And you can do a Control-S and save it. It should save in the same file as your other AS file. And it'll save with the same name as your class. So this name, and this name all should be the same. Remember, that's the rule. That your file name, your class name, and your constructor name all have the same name. All right, the X and Y value we already have because he's inherited from a movie clip. And so we just need to make that variable being used or being shown or visible. Well, we don't want to make him visible. We can make it invisible. I'm just going to call it being used. All right. And actually, to follow good programming practice, let's make him private. I'll make him a variable. I'm going to call him being used. And I'm going to make him a type Boolean. A lot of state variables are of type Boolean. They're either true or false. They don't take up a lot of memory. And because of how computers work, it makes sense to make him a Boolean. And then our constructor code, remember our constructor code is run every time we create a new mole object. So we can set this variable for them. Being used will be false at first because he is not going to be used when he's created. So that's like his default value will be false. And then we're going to write a couple other helper functions in here for us. Okay, so this is our setter, our mutator function. Set being used, we can set it either to true or false. Okay. So in your set functions actually always look the same way. They always take in value of that type and then set that instance variable to whatever you passed in as the parameter. That's called your set function or your mutator, right? It's good to put some comments in here. It's your set or mutator function. This is actually good programming practice. You'll see this in other programming languages, setters and getters. Okay, they're a part of every class. Next function we'll make is our get function, our accessor function. Because we made him private, we need to have this guy. So the difference between this one and this one's called get and this one's called set. This one takes in a parameter and this one does not. Oh, and I forgot to put the return type. Here our return type is void. And here our return type is Boolean. And all we do is return being used. So here's where we get access to it. And the reason that we have to have this function is because he's private. We can't see what this value is unless we call this function. Then we can tell what that value is. Okay, that's called your accessor function. This is good programming to do it this way. Okay? We have our setters, we have our getter. Oh, and then we need another one. This will be very helpful to us. We're going to call it public function set x and y. And you can guess what this one's going to do. We'll send it an xy value and then it can set his x and y. And yes, we can set his x and y. You know, inside of the stage, but I think it makes sense to have this function because then we can set being used to true in here. Okay, so we can call this our new x value. It's going to pass in a number. And then our new y value, and it's going to pass in a number. Doesn't need to return anything, so our return type can be void. And we can set the x value of our mole to whatever we passed in, and the y value of our mole to whatever we passed in, and then we can set being used to true. Actually, maybe we should call this appear. Let's call this function appear. So kind of following the same methodology we did before. If you make him appear, we can set his x and y value of where we want him to appear, and we set that Boolean value that, hey, he's appearing on the screen or being used to true. And then let's make a disappear function. So same kind of methodology before. In our disappear function, to make him disappear, let's just put him somewhere out in outer space. And then our being used will be turned to false. So that way we can make him appear, and then his being used is true. That means, hey, he's on the screen. We don't want to use him again. And then our disappear function, we make him go off the stage and make his being used be false. This kind of methodology kind of works for our Flash professional games. Awesome. So let's kind of review that, make sure you kind of know what's going on in here. We just have that one more property that we gave to our mole objects. He already had the x and y. And remember that you have the end of your class and then the end of your package here. So make sure you know all of your functions are within those last two curly brackets, right? Okay, we'll save that. Now we can use all this property being used and stuff. We can use that in his disappear, reappear function or appear functions. All right, so let's go and test it. So now I can comment back in these two lines of code. My moles can disappear. And I can add them to the stage ready to go. Actually, let's put disappear underneath adding them to the stage. So remember, we create our mole, we put him into our vector, we add him to the stage, and then we make him disappear, and he's up in space ready to be appearing. And that way he's all loaded and ready to go. Should we test that function, or should we assume that it works? Maybe we should test it really quick. We have our test code here. Okay. To test that it works, we can say, okay, test mole dot appear. And remember that we feed it now the x and y value. So since we already had our test code there, we might as well test that our class is working and that we have everything working. And that mole should still appear on the screen, and you shouldn't get any runtime errors. Okay? If you have errors, this is a good time to fix him. All right, and then this is a good time to name our curly brackets. All right, now we got everything set up. Our mole is ready to go. Now we can implement that step fully, right? So remember how we're programming in parts here. We got our mole. He's ready to go. We've tested him. He looks pretty good. Now remember our algorithmic step, what we want to do. Exactly. At random intervals, we want to have a mole appear where the hole is on the screen. And when it's finished playing, remove it from the stage. All right. How do you think we're going to do that? What event listener do we need to have to be like a timer? You guys might have already added this event listener. What's a good timer function that we use in all of our games? We've used in all of our games. You guys tell me. You want to add an event listener for what? You guys know it. I know you know it. Event. What event? To be our timer for our code. You copy and paste it from our other code. What is it called? Maybe I asked it wrong. What do we need? We need this guy. We need the enter frame event. In our enter frame event, we're going to do lots of things. Enter frame event, we'll check to see if we need to add a mole. We'll check to see if the mole is hit. You know, we'll do all those things. So I'm going to copy and paste this from my old game. It's going to look the same way. I can even name my function the same. Okay. So this is an important event listener we always have in our games. The enter frame event, remember that this event is fired 24 times a second. This is kind of how we use our clock for our game. All games, especially GUI games, need a timer. Okay. Or a clock. All right. So I just copy and pasted that. Hopefully you guys did too. And then I'm going to copy and paste the top of this code, because this is what my function is going to look like. Remember to put this function after all of your other functions, but before the end of your class. Right? Okay. So we have the on enter frame. Remember that this is the function that's called 24 times a second. And then I'm going to copy and paste this part. I'm going to loop through. So I'm just going to copy my for each loop so I don't have to type it again. You guys could type it again if you want. So what we're going to do is we're going to, let's write down what we're going to do first, actually. So let's write down our little mini algorithm, how we're going to implement this. So first we're going to make a random number to see if we need to add a mole to the stage. So we want this to happen at random intervals. Okay, if you have it at set intervals, I guess you could have it at set intervals, but we want to make a random number so we could add these moles to the screen at random times. Okay, kind of like how we did in our Space Invader game, just to review here. Where do we add an enemy? Actually, this is my old Space Invader game without the enemy code. Here it is. So remember in our old code, to make an enemy, we got that random number. And if that random number was greater than 9.8, we added an enemy. So we're going to kind of, I thought we could follow the same kind of methodology to add a mole. Get a random number, and if that random number is bigger than 9.8, we'll add that mole to a hole. Okay. So I'm going to copy and paste this code, and I'll wait a couple seconds because I don't know if you guys have, well, you guys probably have this code too. Okay, remember our trace statement was only here just for testing purposes. So if that random number is, remember you can play around with this number to see, how long or how many times you want to add that mole to the screen. I need to put that for each loop in here too. And we're going to follow the same kind of methodology here too. Remember to indent right. Okay. And if you're copying and pasting like me, remember to get your curly brackets correct. And you can name them so that you'll get them right. All right, so we need to change some of these for every and I guess we can call him mole. For every mole inside of our moles, if our mole is not being used, so I'm using that function that I created in my mole called getBeingUsed. It will tell me if it's true or false. False if he's not being used, and true if he's being used. So what I'm going to do is, if he's not being used, so I'm going to put the not operator, which is the exclamation point. So what I'm doing is I'm iterating through my vector. I'm checking to see if that mole is not being used. Okay. That means that his variable, that Boolean instance variable, will be false. So this will make it true. So then I'm going to use that mole.appear function. And I want him to appear. Now here's where we're going to, add some more code in here in a second. I want him to appear at a random hole that is not being used. So what we're going to do at first is we're just going to make him appear. Who cares where we make him appear? Right? We're just going to make him appear at the same hole, right? And then we'll program the whole stuff in a second. But this is a good place where we get it to work. Then you add a little bit more logic to it. Okay, so I'm going to figure out where my hole is on my screen. And actually, I needed to make my holes a little bit bigger. So I'm going to delete these holes. All right. So I'm just going to make him appear on this first hole up at the top. All right. So I just made some generic holes. You guys can figure out where your holes are too, if you have different holes. But what you do is you click on your hole. You look over here. Here's my x value is 125 and my y value is 114. So that's where I'm going to make my mole appear. And then I can adjust for it. And we're going to, make it appear at different places. And we need to add some logic to our holes. Okay. But before we do that, let's just make that mole appear. Okay, so then we're not programming too much, and then we'll have too much to test, and then there's too much to break and too much to fix. So you get this part working first. Okay, so I'm just going to make him appear at this hole. So my hole is 125 and 114. So that's where I want him to appear. So you remember that that appear function takes in that x and y value. So I'm just going to hard code 125 and 114 in here now. Not the best way to program this, but just for testing. Because I think we need to do something to our mole too so he doesn't keep popping up, right? Yeah. All right. Oh, and then if you got this compile time constant for event, you guys should know what that error is now. What is this error? If it doesn't know what the event class is, why is that? Because we forgot to. What did we forget to do? Yeah, we forgot to import our library. So if you ever get those, remember, if it doesn't know what a class is, it's just because we forgot to import our libraries. So remember that you can come back here to your old code, or you could just type this in there. Copy that event library, flash.events.event, and put it up with all the other import statements at the top. And then you'll know what that event is. All right, and then we need to fix this a little bit. Now, the reason I had two moles popping up is because I left that test mole in here, so I'm going to comment out my test mole that I had in my constructor, so I can only see the single mole that I'm making up here. Actually, he's making more than one, but he's making them in the same place. There he is. Now, he's staying on the screen because we did not tell him to disappear. And he's appearing in the wrong spot. Now, how could I get him to appear in the correct location? Yeah, so what he's doing is, this hole's x and y value, the hole's x and y value is the top left-hand corner of my hole. Now I can either make my hole's x and y value the bottom, okay, or I can just move my mole over and adjust for it. Okay, so you can do that two ways. Let's see if I can make my hole's x and y value the bottom. I guess I could convert these to symbols and change it, or how do you make a hole's x, y value the bottom? Actually, I think I might just have to, because he's a drawing object and not a movie clip object. Now you can make him a movie clip object and then change his x and y value. How did you guys do it? You just adjusted for your mole? Oh, no one's done it yet, huh? We could adjust for him. And that's just saying like where those x and y values are on the screen. So let's see here. So if his x, y value is up here, and I want him to appear down here, actually maybe I will just break down and make this a movie clip object.
Can I see what your variable moles looks like?
Yeah. I'm gonna go ahead and just make him just to fix him. Actually, we need to make him a movie clip anyway. Well, we don't exactly have to. But. So I'm gonna make him a whole movie clip. Now, if you guys already have images on your screen, you can just adjust your X and Y values too. I mean, just adjust what you had in those parentheses of where you want your mole to appear. So his X and Y value is 192 and 153. So you would just change these numbers to make your mole appear in the right place. You guys will have to figure those out. That's your job. Figure out where your X and Y values are. There, he's appearing more in the right spot. I might have to make him up a little bit. So if I wanted his Y value to be up maybe like 10 pixels. There, he's appearing more or less in the right spot. Okay. What code did you need to see?
The parent variable for moles.
Oh, how we instantiate or declare him? That's how we declared him, and remember this is how we instantiate. And you declare him outside your constructor, and then you instantiate him in your constructor. All right, our mole keeps popping up. What's an easy way that we can make him stop that? Actually, let's do this together. Okay. I was going to make you guys do that part on your own, but maybe you guys won't take it. So we're going to go back to our flaw file. Go back to your mole. Go to his timeline. I'm actually going to add a layer to his timeline because I'm going to add some action script code here. So I added a layer. I put that layer on top. I could call it my A layer. And normally you don't want any kind of action script code on your timeline, but you can keep simple action script like a function call on your timeline. That's okay. Usually that will not cause compile errors. I'm going to go to my timeline. I'm going to go to the end where my mole is gone. I'm going to hit the F6 key. I'm going to make sure I'm in that first layer. So I'm going to make a keyframe on this layer. I'm going to hit the F6 key to make that keyframe, because remember that you have to have action script code on a keyframe. I'm going to go to Window, go to Actions, to make my Actions panel open. And here I'm going to actually call the disappear function. Now how is he going to know what disappear is? Because he's a mole object, he will know that go to his class and go and call the disappear function. And he'll go and make himself disappear. Remember that that's that function we wrote here called disappear. It takes in no arguments. So I put that on the last frame there, so at the last frame, he'll go and call his disappear function and make himself go away. And remember that sets his variables. Seems to be working okay. He pops up, he goes down. Sometimes he only pops up a little bit. That works pretty okay. Yeah, it works. Okay, so let's program a little bit more, and then I'm going to have you guys program the rest of this on your own. Or at least this part on your own. Not the whole thing. Okay, so note that when we make him appear, we're only programming him for one hole. He's only appearing in the one hole. That's kind of boring. We need him to appear in different holes. Different moles to appear in different holes. Okay. We need him to appear at random hole that's not being used. Okay, so if the hole's already being used by another mole, we don't want the other mole to appear there. Okay. So we're going to add a little bit of code to our hole. We're going to add a hole.as file to encapsulate all the information about our hole, and we're going to use that same kind of methodology where we're going to make a being used instance variable for a hole object. Now if you were like me and you made a whole movie clip object, you'll be changing this file. If you didn't make a whole movie clip object, you still have to make a whole class. You would go to File, New, go to 3.0, tell it you want the whole class. Now if you made a whole movie clip object, you could right click, go to Properties, and hit that pencil icon next to your hole. And then, since we already wrote a lot of this code, you could actually copy and paste some of it. So in your whole class, you're going to have an instance variable called being used. In your constructor, you can set being used to false. And then you can copy and paste those other functions that we created. They're going to work the same way. So we have our constructor, we have our setter, we have our getter, we have our appear. Well, actually, we don't really need appear and disappear, but that's okay. So everybody has their whole, right? Their whole class. Now I'm debating in my head whether to make a vector of holes or just instantiate them separately. I think it might be easier if we just instantiate them separately. So let's start out with two holes. So what I did is I'm going to make some instance variable. I've called them hole 1, hole 2, and I'll just make 6 of them. I'm going to make 6 in all, but right now I just want to program a couple, and then you guys can be in charge of programming the rest. So then I'm going to set their x and y values in my constructor, instantiate them. So remember to declare them up here where you declare your instance variables, right? And I come down here to my constructor. Yes? Oh, I'm in Space Invader. Sometimes I didn't even know. Thank you. Yeah, that would make sense why I don't have that many instance variables. Much better. So our whole 1 and our whole 2. Then I'm going to come down here and instantiate them. Note how we always kind of follow the same, thing. Always, a little bit different, but a lot of it's the same. We're making them with our constructor, and our constructor looks like that. I was just making sure I knew what my constructor looked like. I didn't have an X and Y in my constructor, but I did have this appear function to set as X and Y. Okay, so this is in my whole class. And actually, when I want him to appear, I don't want his being used to be set. This is for the holes. The holes are going to appear, and we don't know if they're being used. So I'm not going to have that code. So then my holes will keep track of their X and Y values. I'll tell my whole 1 to appear. He appears where his X and Y value will appear here. Because I saw those numbers on my screen where I wanted that whole 1 to appear. And then I'm going to add him. Do the same thing with hole 2. But I want him to appear maybe like 100 pixels to the right. Maybe more than 100, 200. This guy will be called hole 2. So note that's hole 1, and then I add hole 2. And you guys will add 6 holes, or 8 holes, or 10 holes. How many holes do you guys want? So I'm actually going to delete them from my stage, because now I'm going to add them through my code. Now if you have a background that has holes on it, we could draw them over the holes with the background. It will make your holes appear over that background. So make our new holes appear. I can even run it and test it right now to make sure it works. There's my holes. And actually, they're appearing in front of my moles, so actually I'm going to take this whole class, or whole instantiation, and put it just easy. Instantiate them right before my vectors. See what I did? I just cut that code and put it ahead of it. So then my moles are on top of my holes, not underneath them. There he is. So we instantiated our holes, and now I can come down here and now I can use them. Okay, here's where we're going to write a little bit of logic. We're going to make another random variable. We'll call it which hole or something. And since I'm going to have 6 holes, right now I only have 2 holes, so I'm going to put a 2 right there. So I want either number 1 or number 2 to appear. Or I want which hole to be a 1 or a 2. So I'm going to multiply it by 2 and add 1, so he's either a 1 or a 2. So if my which hole is a 1, and my hole 1 dot get being used is false, so not being used. If my hole 1 is not being used, then go ahead and set being used to true. And make my mole appear at that hole. Alright. Then we'll save him. Make sure he works. We're not having any moles appear, so we need to debug this.
When you do math on random times 2 plus 1, you sure that's not like a 1 or 2?
So math.random gives us a decimal number, and we multiply it by 2, it'll give us a number between, it'll give us a 0 or a 1, and if we add 1, it should give us a 1 or a 2. Let's make sure our hole is false. And you could even comment out that first trace statement and add a trace statement here if you want to check that out. So it was good that Alan, thought, well, maybe this isn't giving us the right random number. So
Oh, it's like 2-point decimal. It's not exact.
oh yeah. So we need to make it into an integer, huh?
Maybe just floor it.
Yeah, we can floor it. It doesn't like that. Actually, we might have to just floor it, huh? Very smart. Good. Yeah, it wasn't giving us the right random number, right? So look how we did that. So remember your order of operations, it gives us a random number. We multiply it by 2. It gives us 1 point something or 2 point something. Actually, it'll give us 0 point something or 1 point something. And then when we floor it, it'll give us a 0 or a 1. Because flooring it just drops all the decimals. It doesn't round it. And then when we add 1, it'll give us a 1 or a 2. There it goes. And you only appeared once. That's not good. Oh, and you know why? Actually, maybe this is a cool place to stop and you guys can kind of think how to fix this. Maybe you guys can fix it. But what's happening is once we set being used to true, how do we set it back to false? So once we set to true and that hole is used once, we're not setting it back to false and we can't use them again. Where should we set that hole being used to false?
Look up in the code or before? In the mole?
Okay, in the mole. How are we going to do that? Let's think.
So it could disappear.
Actually, this is a good place to kind of. I'm thinking that we're going to have another. Actually, how are we? So last time, we made it from our timeline here, but our timeline, we're not going to be able to access a whole object. We're either going to have to make an event list or throw in a listener, throw an event out. Or we can throw an event, so like when our mole is done, we can throw that event out. What's another way that we can do it? We can set a counter, a timer. I think throwing an event out might be the easiest way to do this. What do you think, Mila? Did you program this part yet? No.
No, but I'll do it later.
Throwing an event out probably from the end of the mole object would probably be our best way. So at the end of our mole object, we can make him throw an event, and we can listen for that event, and when that event happens. But then we have to remember which hole he's using. Dang it. It's turning out a little bit more complicated than I thought. What usually happens when you start programming these things, right? This is good. It's good thinking. It's good for us to think of new ways to try to fix this. We got a lot of it working today. What you could do to the end of class, because I actually have to, it's a good place to stop and kind of test and make things work. And then kind of think about our next step. But we got a lot of it working.